On this episode of Drinks Around the Table, renowned horror author Elsie Mortimer is here. We talk shop about her favorite items from the toy box of terror to induce horror in readers, the origins of her pen name, and what horror trope she wants to tackle next. Hope you enjoy. I enjoy both pen names for you. You feel more like a Sophie or an LC?
I think it just depends on my mood. I can go either way.
Yeah.
Really? I feel like either one is okay.
Sure. Both are fine names.
Yeah.
But...
At spooky season, I probably feel more like an Elsie Mortimer just because I have so many zombie books and I wrote a ghost story for Colin's anthology.
You did, yes. You did. It was quite good too. Swords in the Shadows, everybody, October 24th. We'll plug right out the gate.
Oh yeah, you know what? That's the way to do it. I like that. That way people remember. They can get serious about buying it.
Exactly. All right, so that was Swords in the Shadow was you did a ghost story and a swords and sorcery horror hybrid. So this is one of my favorite questions to ask horror enthusiasts, whether they be creators or just consumers of horror. Okay. But where did your relationship with horror begin?
Okay, that's a really cool question. So I did talk about this a little bit on a panel at Tremendicon, but I read a Goosebumps book when I was a kid and it just terrified me. It was the scariest thing I'd ever read in my life. It was the first time I ever read a scary book. And my parents banned me from reading anything that was spooky, just a straight up ban. And so I wasn't allowed to watch scary movies or anything. And so it wasn't until I got older and I had friends who were interested in horror and I picked up a zombie novel and I was just kind of hooked after that.
Nice. I mean, yeah, when you get it banned, that's just basically, I'm going to start seeking this out everywhere now if I'm not supposed to read it.
Yeah, that's fair. I was pretty well behaved for the most part, but
okay.
Yeah, I was kind of a goody two shoes, but not anymore.
Not anymore. Those days are over.
No, all right, now I watch all the scary stuff I want.
Good. You should. It should be part of every good imaginative diet.
That's fair. I like that. So what about you? Have you always loved spooky stuff?
Oh man, yeah. I've told the story before too, but yeah, I grew up with storytellers, and so ghost stories were huge around the campfire, around flashlights, grandparents, great uncles, that whole generation above my parents were all avid storytellers, and a lot of them loved horror. Probably heard stories I should not have heard at the age that I heard them, but yeah, it definitely opened some dates. What's weird is stuff not Goosebumps, but scary stories to tell in the dark type stuff. Once I read those, there were a couple of those that I actually heard from these relatives. So I mean, they were, which I mean, they're scary stories to tell in the dark. I mean, it's well known that those are mind collective horror stories. They didn't just make them all up, which is part of the appeal. But having it one that I had heard, having that be in the collection was very dope as a kid. I was like, oh, I know this story.
That's kind of cool though, because you could anticipate the twist and you knew what was coming and
the changes and because it's never, there's always tweaks that everybody does regionally to a ghost story that
that's fair,
grows it. But all right, so you've been on before. You were on as Sophie Stern.
Yeah.
You were in my first season. Thank you for doing that, by the way.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
No, yeah. So you mentioned there that you'd gone to college. You studied, what'd you major in?
English. Yeah, creative writing.
And then how did that affect you artistically?
So For me, it's actually kind of funny. I always knew that I wanted to write. Like, I always knew that was a job that I wanted to do. But I never really knew how to write a book. Like, I never really understood how to write a book and have that be like a career path or just something that I did. So I entered the world of freelance writing and I did technical writing for a long time. So I wrote for a lot of brands and I used to do like website content for doctors and attorneys. And I did professional blogging for many years. And for me, one thing that kind of changed everything was I went to a random book signing at a Barnes and Noble. Have I told you the story before?
I don't think so.
So an author that I liked, a zombie writer, was doing like a book signing at this Barnes and Noble, and I was like, that's only a 2-hour drive. I could totally do that. So I went on a whim, talked to the author. I'd never met an author before. It was my first time. And I was like, oh, I'm a writer too. And he was like, oh, well, what genre do you write? And I was like, no, I don't write fiction. I could never do that. And he asked me why. He asked me why I couldn't do that. And that question, like, I kind of like chewed on it for a while. And I kind of started doing a little bit of thinking about why I thought that I couldn't write a book. And shortly after that, I wrote my very first Elsie Mortimer horror novel.
Nice.
And I thought it was pretty good. And did not get it published though. So it's in a drawer somewhere, but it was
That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, got the ball rolling. That's what matters.
Yeah, so that was kind of my start. What about you? Did you kind of always know that you wanted to be like a writer, or was there like a moment where you were like, this is it, this is what I'm doing?
I'm sure there was, but I don't remember it. I mean, I was young enough that, coming from a family of storytellers, I was always good at, telling relaying stories either that were funny that had happened, or making them up via making comic books up with my friends, or stuff like that. So yeah, I had pretty much always had, and then I just eventually got to the point where I've told this story 1,000 times, but I started learning flash fiction with a group of flash fiction writers, and that led to writing a blog where I made up a story for the blog. And then so yeah, that dates this pretty good because that's back when blogs were doing real good.
I like blogging too, so
right. And then that spun out to me turning that into a book and soliciting that to publishers, and then just self-publishing.
It's kind of funny looking back on like all of our different paths that led to like writing, because I feel like so many of us writers wrote when we were little. And my grandma recently found like a collection of stories I'd written when I was a kid, and she was like, oh, I thought you needed these. And it was really interesting how many themes I saw like in those stories that I incorporate all the time now. And
That's
some of
awesome.
them were scary, and some of them were just really sad, and some of them had like shapeshifters, which I love to write now. So it was kind of funny.
No, that's awesome. I mean, yeah, you got bands from reading it, so you just wrote your own.
You know what? Maybe I am a rebel. Didn't even know.
There you go. See, you didn't even know. All right, so okay, we talked about the fact that last season you were here as Sophie Stern, romance novelist. This year, Elsie Mortimer, horror. Are your pen names just different business hats you wear, or is there a whole mindset shift involved when you sit down to write?
So I would say it's probably more of a mindset. My Sophie Stern books are all romance based. So the main point of the story is that somebody falls in love, every single book. Sometimes those are, sci-fi romances, sometimes they're paranormal, but somebody is always falling in love.
Right.
Whereas with my Elsie Mortimer books, I feel like I have a little more variety in the genres. So sometimes there will be a really spooky book, and sometimes it'll be dystopian zombies, and there's a little more flexibility there, which I kind of like. But I do love both my pen names, and just getting to write that variety is really fun.
No, that's very cool. But there's not. Yeah, I mean, it's when you're writing as one, you don't like it. Like for you, it is a mindset where, all right, I'm Elsie Mortimer right now. I'm, there's not. If there is romance, it's potentially doomed romance. Like that's the headspace you're in.
I would never doom a romance. Okay, maybe they're not as separate as I said. Maybe it is business heads.
Okay. Nothing
But
wrong with that. There's not a judgment. I was just curious.
That's fair. No, that's a really interesting question. Because yeah, I feel like when I write stories as Elsie Mortimer, the point of the story is not the characters falling in love. So I can do that. I can have a doomed romance or have somebody that, doesn't have any sort of partner, and maybe the point of the story is just that they go into a haunted castle, like my story in Swords in the Shadows.
Sure. Wow. You were just getting points left and right from Outland Entertainment here. Right? All right, so then yeah, well, because I know horror authors that for them it's like method acting, where they have to sink into this horrible mindset to write true terror.
Yeah.
But I also know people that it is a business situation. It is, I'm this story, I need X amount of words for this type of story. That's what I'm going to knock out.
Okay.
And so, or like for me, I am a pantser or a plotter. Yeah. I am a pantser to a degree, and I've been writing short stories where all of a sudden, oh shit, this is a horror one. Okay, so now this is going to be a Michael Gideon book or short story more so than Aaron.
Okay.
And Aaron, I open up, it's everywhere. I keep horror just to Michael Gideon. And so I've had that surprise happen where I'm writing, I'm setting out, and then all of a sudden there's a shift that I didn't see coming, but it fits. Yeah. So it's like, oh, nope, so for me, it's not a mindset so much as I don't know where I'm going half the time. So I figure it out as I go. It makes it more entertaining for me. I mean, I know people that can't, that they need to be the plotter, which their stuff is excellent. So fair enough.
Yeah.
Whatever gets the pages down.
Well, I think that's one of the cool things about being a writer, right? Like, there's no wrong way to do it unless you just don't actually write anything. I mean, There's so much flexibility and versatility, and I feel like every author you talk to is gonna have like their own plan and their own strategy and their own way that things work.
Right. No. Yeah. And I mean, that's part of why I dig doing this show, is getting into the kind of nuts and bolts, into the weeds of how everybody approaches their art.
Yeah.
I've never actually asked you this before. What's the origin of the pen name Elsie Mortimer?
Ooh, that is a secret. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we'll edit this part out.
No, that's totally fair. So Mortimer is the last name of an old friend that I dearly loved, and the L and C are my grandparents' initials.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. All right. Well, that's much sweeter, given the horror aspect, than I would have guessed.
Oh, okay. Maybe I need to think up a better.
No. That's fine. That's fine. All right, then. Okay, touching on what I just said about like going, how I approach. I'm writing a story and it shifts on me. Do you, as somebody that writes both horror and romance, how's that balance in your mind? Like, do you approach every idea the same way every time, or does it depend on which hat you're wearing?
For me, it definitely depends on the hat I'm wearing. And one thing that I tend to do is I have a lot of plot ideas, as I'm sure you do. I feel like that's one of the hardest things about being a writer, is getting all of these ideas and being like, what can I actually do? What do I have time to do?
Right.
Because there's just so many ideas. And so, I'll get an idea and be like, oh, I think this would work well if I reshape it into a horror story or a zombie adventure. Or I might get another idea and be like, oh, this would work really well in like a romance situation. So as I get ideas, I definitely like try to kind of balance that out.
Okay. Do you, because I don't know how disparate ideas romance and horror are. Like, I imagine there's actually some fairly decent crossover. What do you find more difficult? I mean, with the reader in mind, what do you find more difficult? Coming up with a relationship that romance or readers are like, it's gonna check all the boxes, or horror readers trying to scare them, like checking those boxes. Like, is one easier than the other for you, or no?
So I think that romance is probably a little easier, and part of that's just because romance readers tend to love tropes, and so you can get really tropey when you're writing, and you can have ideas that are kind of silly and like over the top, like, you know, they're snowed in and there's just one bed, like that sort of trope, like, is really popular and fun. Or there's a fake marriage and you have to marry this guy so he can inherit a bunch of money. Like, you can be silly, which I love. And romance readers are fantastic because they love the tropes that they love. And so even if they read it 30 times, they're good with it. I mean, that's how I am as a reader too. So I love that. But with horror, I feel like I've always felt there's a lot of crossover between like horror writers and actually like erotica writers, because you really have to focus on how you make the reader feel and kind of conveying like whatever that emotion is that you're trying to get. So when I'm writing a horror story, I feel like I'm a lot more conscious of how the reader might interpret this. And what they're going to be feeling at each step of the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. Well, and I mean, there's certainly no shortage of tropes in horror either.
For sure.
As a horror reader, like, that's the thing. And then and I feel like I'm talking about romance more than I thought I would, just because we'd already done the Sophie Stern episode.
There?
I know. So I'm gonna dial back into horror a little more, but now I forgot where I was going with that question. I'll just skip to the next one.
I think you were going to ask me what the spookiest thing I've ever written was.
I can ask that question. That's a good one. But I mean, can you do that? Can you divorce yourself from the material enough to be like, ooh, that was spooky, or not? I mean, is it all just kind of, no, that was well written, I like that?
So I think that I can, and one thing that I've learned over many years of writing, as I'm sure you have too, is you kind of have to look at your work and kind of have a little bit of distance and not be like, I wrote this, it's perfect, I'm not going to change anything about it.
Right.
And instead look at it and say, is this what I wanted my readers to feel? Like, am I getting across just how scared my character is? Or just how, uncomfortable the situation might be? Because I write so much dystopian and so many zombie stories lately, one thing that I really want to focus on is the panic enough? Is everybody scared enough? Are they scared at an appropriate level? And am I conveying that to my readers?
Okay, so to answer your own question, what do you feel is the scariest piece you've done?
I think the scariest thing I've done was the story that I wrote for the anthology Swords in the Shadows.
Come on.
Next month.
I mean, it was good and creepy, but is that really your answer, or are you just plugging the book again?
I actually think that was probably the spookiest thing I've written. That was fun, and it was a challenge because it was a short story. Yeah. So I felt like I had to really get to the point. Whereas if I'm writing a novel, I have all this time to kind of build up tension, and you can get to know the character and their really sad backstories. Sure. And with that one, I loved it.
We had
I loved all the stories in there.
There are a lot of really good ones in there. Yeah. So what do you think, other than the word count? I mean, do you think the parameters that were set are what made it so scary? Like the scariest? I mean, is that the difference that made it the scariest you've written, you think?
So I think the parameters played a really big role, not just in the parameters for the story, but the parameters of the world, because my story just took place in like an old castle in the woods. Yeah. And so there wasn't a lot of external stuff that really affected the story. Whereas when I'm writing a book, I have a lot more options, which can be fun, but my characters tend to move around a lot. So they kind of have to move to a new place, and I have to build that area of the world. and then
Yeah.
establish what's scary. Whereas I feel like this was just a little punchier and a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pacing is vastly important with horror. So yeah, having
Yeah.
it be that it's done. You've only
Boom,
got
boom, boom,
so many
boom.
words. Like you've got to get in, you got to
Yeah.
get out. It's one of the things that learning Flash, as I did with the group, learning how to do effective Flash was probably one of the best lessons I've ever had. Not to say that all of my Flash is effective, but like the fact that there are beats to be found in a piece of Flash fiction that make it an effective piece of prose.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I've not read all of your horror work, but the horror work that is in Swords in the Shadows
You
was very
haven't
good.
read all of my horror.
Yeah, right. Would you care to
Wow.
tell the audience how many books you've written just in horror as L.C. Mortimer? Probably don't even know.
It's a
Yeah.
few. There's a couple out there.
Yeah, everybody just go to Amazon. You'll see what I'm talking about.
There's a small selection.
Right. All right. So, what was your first published horror?
My first published horror was called The Dead of Night.
Okay.
And that one was, I wrote it as a zombie novel, and then I rewrote it not as a zombie novel, and then I rewrote it again and changed the point of view. And
Wow.
then I rewrote it again like the next year. So it was, I think it's still available, but it is a horror, and it's a dystopian horror about, actually it's kind of weird. It's like about a pandemic, which was like before its time.
Wow. Yeah.
But that one was, I think that one will always have a special place in my heart. But that story was, a lot of us with our first stories were like, I want to include this memory from my childhood or this
Right.
person that I knew. And so I reread it recently and I'm like, oh, I named this character after my professor that I liked. And
I
I
know
don't do that anymore. But
100%.
I
I did. Yes. And I still do. But
Yeah.
Waking the Weaver is chock full of references, and I mean, none of it means anything to a writer that's not from the small Midwestern town that I came from.
Yeah.
But anybody that does definitely is like, oh, I understood that reference.
And it's kind of fun too, to kind of get that feedback from people.
Yeah.
Or people
Yeah,
just
I
like,
don't see anything wrong with it as far as, my only, I guess, the only weirdness with some of my horror is I had published the pieces that I did online where I had invited friends to be in it with their names to be in it. And so I do have the same names throughout 4 different stories, and people are probably like, that didn't meet me in person probably don't know that, oh, that's why I was killing my friends and family, basically.
oh, Aaron.
They asked to be. All right, so as of this moment right now, what is your favorite horror standard to play with? Favorite trope to play with? Like, what are the best toys in horror to your mind?
Best toys in a horror? That's
In
an
hor-
impossible question.
In
That's
horror.
kind of
Well,
a
you
mean
seem
question.
drawn to zombies. You got a lot of zombie stuff.
I do. And the thing that I like about zombies is I can do a lot with my characters.
Yeah.
So I can have a character I have one character who's a paralegal and she's never gotten her boots dirty. She's never done anything. She doesn't know how to survive. And then I can throw in an ex-military guy who can show her how to do anything. And then you can throw in like an old person that everybody underestimates because of their age. And they're like, actually, I used to camp a lot. I know all this stuff.
Right.
So for me, I just feel like you can throw in so many different characters, have the same type of monster, and it's a different experience in every book.
That's true. Yeah, I guess zombies can become just kind of the background noise, which seems
Yeah.
bizarre given what they are, but
It kind of does. So like I had one book that came out either earlier this year or last year called Zombie Survival for Foster Kids. And that's all about this kid is about to be reunited with his dad and the zombies come. And so it's all about his journey like back to finding his dad.
yeah.
And there are zombies.
Well,
But
sure.
like there were so many different things I got to play with in that. And they like hid at a campsite and they had to zip line across a river and do all of this different stuff just to survive.
That's, I mean, yeah. Well, talk about you saying I'm mean. That's mean. Like, kids just about to get reunited and there's a zombie apocalypse.
It was mean. I do feel very bad for that book, but it was also really fun to write.
I mean, that's key. What's are there any toys that you have not played with that you look forward to playing with? Tropes and concepts.
So I would like to do more ghost stories moving forward.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I love my story from Swords in the Shadows so much. That was like, I actually think I have one other ghost story. So it was my second ghost story.
Okay.
And I think I'd like to try more like of the paranormal elements in horror and kind of explore like things that are haunted and just some different elements with that.
All right. That's true. I mean, you did ghosts and gothic spooky castles. You pretty much got 2 checked off in that one story. And Swords in the Shadows coming out. No. And I'm gonna put the cover up some, but I'm not gonna load this up every time we mention it. Be like a shot game people can take where, oh, they mentioned Swords in the Shadows, take a shot.
That would be a great game. What are you talking about?
Well, there'd be a lot of people in the hospital, is my point. All right, so we're winding down here. What's as far as horror, where do you lean moving forward? Like, you want to move into, what am I trying to ask here? Ghosts are next. Would you do a full-on ghost novel, or not, just paranormal novel instead of short story?
Yeah, I think that's what I want to do next. I think I might do that next year or maybe the year after. Have some sort of ghost novel. I just feel like that would be really fun and it would be a new space for me. So I feel like there would be a lot of wiggle room and a lot of different things I could explore that I haven't done yet.
That's cool. But yeah, because you've done mostly zombies that I've seen. There's Witch, right?
I have some witch books, and then I have some vampire books and a couple of other ones too.
And then your hybrid academy is kind of, what is that, dark? What's that called? Dark.
It's urban fantasy.
Okay, but it's not. I forget what the phrase is, but it's basically when it's school, dark academia. Good Lord, I need to not do this so much.
That's okay. It might be a little too lighthearted to be dark academia, but it is academia. I don't want people to be disappointed if they think it's going to be like really dark and fantasy.
Yeah.
And my characters are like filled with hope.
Right. Lying liars told me this was dark academia. All right. Where can everybody find you? Where you want people to go check out Elsie Mortimer?
The best place to find me is elsiemortimer.com. I have a list of my books there and links to all my socials and links to where you can buy my stuff.
Very cool. And I'll put that all in the description down below so everybody can check that out. Well, hey, thanks for having a drink with me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Till next time.